Mishom ro'eh even Yisrael. At the end of his life, Parshat Vayeitzei, chapter 49, Yakov Avinu is giving final blessings and instructions and advice to all his children, but to his son Yosef, his beloved Ben Poras Yosef, he reserves a very special reference. He calls him the Even Yisrael, the stone of Israel. To understand properly what this means, we're going to have to look closely at Parshat Vayeitzei, but just to understand it in its context, what does he mean by calling Yosef the stone of Yisrael? So Chazal understand that the stone here means a priceless, precious stone, which is a sign of malchus, a sign of leadership, and a sign of power, which Yosef had, and he knew how to use it wisely. And it also, both Orach Chaim and the Ramban connect this to a pasuk that we're familiar with from Hallel, which says, Even moasu habonim hoisa l'rosh pina. The stone that was rejected by all the other builders, in this case all the other brothers, that they rejected Yosef, hayita l'rosh pina, he became the foundation stone for the future of the Jewish people going forward. So this is Yosef getting a rather unique accolade from Yaakov. He is an Even Yisrael. To understand Even Yisrael properly, let's have a look at Parshat Vayeitzei, our Parsha of this week. In the beginning of the Parsha, Yaakov Avinu takes a stone, Vayitzok shemen al rosha, and he pours oil on it, and he calls it that this will be Beis Elokim. This is going to be the foundation of the house of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Chazal understand that at this point in the story of Yaakov Avinu, he is Vayifka bam makom. Ha-makom, the definitive place, is the Har Habayit. And this stone, says the Kli Yakar and other Midrashim, say that this stone is the Even Hashtiyah. The Even Hashtiyah means the foundation stone on which the Beis HaMikdash was built, and goes back, in fact, according to Chazal, to Brias HaOlam. The Even Hashtiyah played an important role. The word Shtiyah, Shin Taf, Yud Hey, comes in Hebrew from the word Tashtit, which means foundation, the infrastructure. Architects, when they build buildings or they build houses, they speak about building the tashtit before they even start building the house. You need to have the foundations built into the ground in order for the whole building to take place. This is the Even Hashtiyah. And in actual fact, we find, for example, the word also appearing at the very beginning of the Torah, of the third son of Adam and Chava. The first two, Cain was the murderer, Hevel was the victim, but the third son was Sheis, Shin Tov, which is Alav Hushtat Ha'olam, that the whole future of humanity was founded on Sheis, and that is the Even Hashasiyah, and that, say Chazal, comes to be the rock on which Yaakov Avinu rested his head, and eventually it became the foundation of the Beis HaMikdash, that this will be a Beit Elokim, the Beis HaMikdash itself. That is, generally speaking, associated with the rock on the Har HaBayis to this very day, over which the Muslims have built the Dome of the Rock. But that rock still remains the foundational point, which gives us an indication of where the Beis HaMikdash was and where the Kodesh Kodashim was. So we still have today a physical remnant of the beginning of Vayeitzei and this particular story. What's interesting about that rock at the beginning of the Parsha is, as we all know, one of the most famous midrashim in the beginning in Vayeitzei is that single rock was actually made up of lots of little rocks, lots of little stones, says the Medrash. Rashi brings a famous Medrash that Yaakov Avinu initially took lots of little stones and put them around his head to protect him, and then when he woke up, it was one big stone. And this is symbolically the power, says the Maharal, of Achdus, of Chibur, of bringing together all the different forces and all the different parts of Jewish people, and particularly combining within him both the powers of Avram and Yitzchak to create the Midah of Tiferes, which is the uniting beauty and harmony of Klal Yisrael. All this is part of the rock. So this rock is the foundation stone on which everything is based. Incidentally, the famous Sefer Mesilas Yesharim, which was written 300 years ago by Rav Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, so in it In chapter 1, he brings this medrash, and he uses it as a midrashic metaphor for the idea that even the physical world, symbolized here by the inanimate stones, were they able to speak, they would all say, Ola yaniach tzaddik es rosho, that they would want to be used for Kedusha. That the physical world, even though of course it can't speak, it has no consciousness and no desire, but were it to express its desires, it would say, we want to be used for Kedusha, we want to be used only for a spiritual purpose, and that is really the way in which a person living a life of Torah and mitzvahs not only elevates himself, says the Mesilas Yesharim in chapter 1, but he's able to actually transform the world around him into kalim, into objects which then can be used for Kedusha and therefore elevated. Interestingly, the Mesilas Yesharim, which is a very small book in actual fact, Rav Ha'echut Uma'at HaKamus, very little quantity but amazing quality. This book, and the very final chapter, chapter 26, where he's gone through the whole ladder of spiritual development, and he reaches the last station of a person reaching personal Kedusha, he comes back to this medrash. At the very, very end of the part of the book, he comes back to this medrash saying that it's possible for a person to reach a level of Kedusha, that even all his ma'asim gashmiyim, all his physical activities, can be transformed into Kedusha. That is the rock of the foundation. But what's interesting in Parshat Vayeitzei is that we also have two other rocks. The next stone in the story of Vayeitzei is that when Yaakov meets Rachel, he's suddenly inspired. He suddenly realizes that together with Rachel, he can overcome all the obstacles in his path. Vayegal et ha'even shal pi ha'be'er. In order to get the water, to give water to the flock of sheep of Rachel, he personally uses superhuman power to remove a stone that normally would need several people, or combined efforts of several people to remove that stone. And he's able to remove the stone. So here the stone is not a foundation stone, but here the stone represents obstacles. That Yakov is anxious that there are obstacles in his path, which he has to remove in order to get to the Be'er Mayim Chaim. And these obstacles, it's interesting, the Seforno brings down a Gemara in Eruvin, that the spiritual obstacles that Yaakov was concerned about is mentioned in the Gemara Eruvin Mem Aleph, where the Gemara says there are shlosha devorim, there are three things in life, ma'avirin odom al da'atov al da'as kono, can make a person lose his da'as, lose his sanity, and also lose da'at kono, lose his emunah. And what are they? The first thing is the influence of the umot ha'olam, the influence of an immoral, corrupt, and atheistic world around, because we are all influenced by our surroundings. That's the first thing that can derail a person spiritually. The second thing is ruach ra. Ruach ra has got various different interpretations, but basically it means a person gets depressed, that he loses his simchas hachayim. He loses his feeling of competence and ability and gets depressed and becomes pessimistic. And here is Yaakov Avinu. Don't forget, at the beginning of our Parsha, Yaakov Avinu, according to Rashi's account of Chazal, he's 77 years old, he is alone, and he is penniless, and he's a refugee from his brother who wants to kill him. So basically, Yaakov at the beginning of Vayeitzei is not in a good place, and he's anxious that Lavan will be a bad influence on him, that he will be surrounded, for the first time in his life, he'll be surrounded not by Kedusha of Yaakov, of Yitzchak and Rivka's house, but of Tumah, of the impurity of the house of Lavan. He'll be surrounded not by Emunah, but he'll be surrounded by paganism. He'll be surrounded not by Chesed, but he'll be surrounded by violence and egoism, and he's going to be influenced by that. And therefore, he needs to overcome these obstacles. So removing the stone from the Be'er is removing the obstacles. The first Even was the Even HaTashtit, was the foundation of his spiritual future. The second Even is the Even of the obstacles. And then in the closing chapter, in the closing verses of Parshas Vayeitzei, we have a third Even. and that is the Gal Aid, the pile of stones, the wall of stones, which is erected in order to protect Yaakov from any future aggression and hostility of Lavan. And he makes a shavua, makes a mutual oath, a peace pact, or at least a non-aggression pact with Lavan, that he won't anymore come and harm him. Interestingly, if we fast forward to Parshas Balak and Bilam, there we find that the donkey crunches Bilam's leg against the wall. So says the pasuk. Say Chazal, Rashi brings it down, that wall was the wall built to protect Yaakov from Lavan, and Bilam crossed that wall in order to curse the Jewish people, and with so he violated that non-aggression pact. So you have first the wall, first the stone of foundation, then the stone of obstacles in the path of spiritual well-being, spiritual and mental well-being, and then you have the third stone, which is a stone of protection. And in that sense, stones represent three different essential levels of the foundation of our life, the obstacles stand in our way which need to be removed, and the protection that we need from people who are potential enemies. All these are the avonim, these are the stones in Parshas Vayeitzei, which describe for us the travels of Yaakov Avinu and the way in which he starts off the Parsha lonely, penniless, and anxious. And 20 years later, the closing part of Parshat Vayeitzei, he has 4 wives, 11 sons and 1 daughter, and he's a wealthy man, he's confident, he's powerful, and he's on his way to building Am Yisrael. So in actual fact, Parshat Vayeitzei is a transformational parsha, but the stones play a crucial role in the stages along the way. And then when it comes to the end of Vayechi, he gives a bracha to Yosef. You will be the Even Yisrael. You will be the stone, even though you were rejected by the others. You will be the Even Pinah. You will have the power, the accumulated power of all the foundations and the removal of obstacles and the protection for the future of Klal Yisrael. And I'll just end by saying one beautiful line in Rashi, that Rashi says, in fact, the word Even, Aleph, Beis, Nun, is a Lashon Nutrikon. What he means here is it's a condensed word. It's a word made up of 2 different words. The word Even is condensed, says Rashi, of the word Av and Ben. It's got to do with the link between parents and children, between the continuity of generations. The message transmitted between parents and children is that Klal Yisrael have all these avonim, have all these stones on which we can build the future of Klal Yisrael. We can overcome the obstacles by removing the stone from the well. We can build a tashtit, we can build a foundation, and we can protect ourselves from our enemies. And that is the bracha of this week's parsha, V'chein Yehi Rotza.